Good evening and a very warm welcome to you to the Football Out West show. A very, very, very special edition tonight. We're going to have none other than a very, very big guest coming up very, very shortly. And really, really looking forward to that tonight. Joining me also in the studio here tonight, well, in his own studio, is Craig Filer. Craig, a very, very warm welcome to you, mate. It's going to be a huge episode 23, in fact, of the Football Out West show. How you been?
I'm good, Tonci. Had a good week, albeit some bad news today with work. But yes, everything's good, and really looking forward, as we are every week, looking forward to the show. There's a lot of preparation goes into each week, and none more so than this week for sure.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Tonight, a big show, as we've mentioned, a huge show, in fact. And, mate, what have we got lined up tonight?
Well, we have, as everybody knows, the Football Federation coming for some fair and unfair stick from many different angles, and I suppose we're really glad that Peter Filopoulos has agreed to come onto the show tonight, who's the CEO and the Football Victoria Chief Executive Officer, who's been kind enough to come on and ask and listen, to the number of questions that we have, and more importantly, what the football fraternity of Victoria and beyond have to say. So really looking forward to some open, honest debate. And we hope that everybody enjoys it.
Now, on a serious note, before we get to the serious business, thank you very much to everyone who has contributed in some way or another. We did ask people, all the fans out there, all the viewers out there, to send us an email, to send all the questions via email. Some people posted up in the comments section. Others made, well, I won't say negative or derogatory comments, but they did make some snide remarks. And we're all for a healthy, mature debate, aren't we, Craig? We talk about it. And we don't want people now to be straight away either insinuating certain things that are simply not true, or judging people or things before they've even happened. And so, look, we've unfortunately had to block one person. We've had to censor a couple of other comments. And we don't want to do that. Despite the fact that I'm wearing a red top tonight, we are certainly not communists on this show, and we are not about censoring, but we are about having a mature debate. And we've got, the CEO of the Football Federation who has come out and agreed to be on tonight's show. He'll be answering anywhere between 20 and 30 questions, depending on time. And the least that we can expect from everyone is the little bit of respect. So on a sad note, we have had to block people. I hope it's the last time we're going to have to do that. When I say block people, it looked like they were fake profiles anyway. But we won't mention names. We won't name names. We're just asking everyone here to be very, 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 what's the word? Mature.
Mature, yeah. We want mature debate. Ask questions by all means, and get involved in the show. But it has to be done correctly, and it's not a slogfest towards Peter or the FFE or the FE. We just want mature conversations that we can all leave in an hour and a half's time, knowing that the federation is, or we're in good hands with the federation, or not, as the case may be. But we're not here certainly not there to have a go at anybody.
Absolutely. Now, I am hearing from a few people that my audio is too low. I've turned it up at the absolute highest, so we've been testing it the whole time, so hopefully the audio comes through, but I will try and speak that little bit louder, okay? But nonetheless, now, before we do go on any further, or before we bring our main guest on, we've got some interesting stuff in the news desk to speak about, Craig.
What have you got there, Tonci?
Okay. Well, first of all, the K-League. The K-League is going to be back. It's going to be the first live football league that we'll be able to watch here. And earlier today, Optus Sport had secured the domestic broadcast rights to the K-League. ensuring Australians will be able to watch one of the first football competitions in the world to return amid the coronavirus pandemic. Now, what this means is tomorrow night, 8 p.m. on Optus Sport, you'll be able to watch a game which will involve the Suwon Samsung Blue Wings, and they'll be facing the reigning champions Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors. Now,
very good, Tonci. Your Korean is spot on, mate. I have to say.
You, mate. Now, most of the Australian football public will be familiar with some of those teams, because for the Blue Wings, we've got two Socceroos, Adam Taggart and Terry Antonis playing. So should be something really good. Daniel Panyakolo has said German League back next week, May 15. Well, hopefully that will also be on the show. And the EPL, there's talk the EPL could be back sooner rather than later, Craig.
Yes, and just on the Optus Sports or the K-League tomorrow, I believe our very own Simon Hill is going to be commentating for that tomorrow evening.
Absolutely. That will be fantastic.
Yeah.
To see.
So with the going back to the EPL, look, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the EPL. I don't think anybody really is. There's lots of talk. There was talk about them coming over to Perth earlier on in the week. I think that was shut down pretty quickly. In terms of the PPL, I'm not really sure. The Bundesliga is going to start on the 14th or 15th of this month, I think. They're going to be back in, but they're going to be playing in front of empty stadiums. But look, football's back in some way, shape, or form, small or big. It doesn't really matter as long as people are getting back on the parks, which is what everybody wants. And we have to still remember that it's still there. COVID hasn't gone away. And ultimately, it is the safety of everybody that we have to make sure, or the governing bodies have to make sure that it's good to go. But we're all hoping that it can kick off very, very soon.
Absolutely. Now, another bit of news. I guess it's a little bit of old news because it happened last Friday. But Football Federation Australia on Friday announced it was partnering with Black Dog Institute to provide mental health education and support to the grassroots football community, as well as the FFA's employees, national team players, directors, and staff. Now, this is important, I guess, for many reasons, not just the FFA's agreement with Black Dog Institute, but also the fact that football, particularly at the community level and community sports in general, Craig, is going to be really important, as obviously as far as recovery from coronavirus, but the mental health element. I know my kids. I've got two kids, 8 and 9-year-olds, and sometimes they go stir crazy, and sometimes they miss their friends, they miss that social element. If they're doing it, what about us adults as well? Exactly the same. So parents and coaches and fans and officials and what you're not, there's such a big community, a football community out there. And, football, the sooner it comes back, the quicker we'll be able to address a lot of the mental health issues that are silently lurking in the background.
Yeah, Tonci, I think I heard a report today that 1 in 5 people will have some kind of mental illness over the next couple of years. So, it is massively important. I know I've done a bit of work with my club on mental illness and supporting, and I know you spoke about it last night on a sister station down in Geelong. And I think it is very important, and it just goes to show that whilst we might not be the majority sport here in Australia, people want to get back out on the park, and the sooner we get out on the park, we get back to some kind of more normality. But I suppose we just have to urge everybody to keep an eye on friends, family, and other folk, just to make sure that they're okay. What's going on at the moment is going to affect everybody for sure.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to bring to your attention, to all the viewers, there was a great article by the ABC News Offsiders columnist Richard Hines, or Hines, or however you pronounce that, on Tuesday. Now, I'm going to bring that up. That article, we've got a grab of that. Community sport must be ready to meet post-coronavirus challenges. Now, this is a really, really interesting article for several reasons, but I guess what it says is just how important community sports are going to be for like what we just mentioned now, the rehabilitation of society in general. And the first paragraph, though, is a really good one. It says, screens are the natural enemy of children's sport and they have laid siege. And basically goes on to say, for those working in community sport, the increased screen dependency of children is creating the understandable fear there will be a missing generation of participants if we are unable to raise them from the couch where the new normality begins. And it's a really good piece. It goes on to say, but there is another reasonable interpretation of how children will respond when the doors spring open, the padlocks are removed from playing field gates, and the whistle blows. They will be bursting to get outside and play again. This is the challenge and the opportunity those with a genuine concern for maintaining and even increasing participation in community sport must address right now before the battle is lost. And look, that's something, Craig, we've been going on about and saying how important it is that we do a lot of the strategic planning now, not wait until down the track when all the clubs convene and resume operations. We need to be doing that now. It's pointless just to sort of having a talk fest. I mean, it's good to acknowledge it, not good to acknowledge the issues that face our sport now, but also the action plan has to be implemented basically immediately.
Yeah, if not before, and those clubs that are ahead of the curve, shall we say, pun on words, but ahead of the curve, they're the ones that will come out the other side. I still feel that there's a lot of clubs out there that are not taking action and not planning and not looking to what the future looks like. And my fear for those clubs is that they may not be around because they haven't taken action now to make sure that as a club they're set up to go forward. So yeah, very interesting report. I had a read of it earlier on, and something that I think a lot of clubs should be looking at.
Now, we have put that link up there as well. So in the comments section, you can click on that link. And it is a really good a topic for discussion, I guess. Very important, like I said. We really need to address some of these issues now and not leave it for later on. We can see we've got quite a large following already. Lots of people tuning in. The numbers are amazing. I think there's about 27.5 million people tuning in, and there's only 26 million in Australia. So we must be getting a lot of viewers from overseas, Craig.
Fantastic. No, it's great to see. Look, we've said it week on week. We're getting bigger and bigger. The audience is becoming stronger and stronger week in, week out. So, from our side, I think we're hitting the nail on the head, so to speak, with the topics that we're speaking about and the guests we're having on. And I suppose, tonight's another example of us trying to speak up for football in Victoria.
Absolutely, mate. Now, a big shout out to Georgie's on Vista, our major sponsor, our weekly sponsor. Big shout out to Mark, Lisa, and the crew out at Caroline Springs George Cross Football Club. Georgie's on Vista this week for Mother's Day will be open on Friday. On Friday, correct? On Saturday as well, but also on Sunday for Mother's Day. So obviously it's all takeaway, but make sure you do. If you're in the vicinity, come in or order your Mother's Day luncheon from Georgie's on Vista. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. And hopefully, depending on what happens tomorrow with the National Cabinet, who knows, we may be able to celebrate Mother's Day in some form or some modified form, Craig.
Let's hope so. We may be able to get an indication of that from our special guest this evening.
And speaking of special guests, he has entered the building. No, we are not talking about Elvis Presley. We are talking about the CEO of Football Victoria, Peter Filopoulos. He'll be joining us very, very shortly. He is in the green room getting his makeup done and grabbing a cup of coffee. And we'd like you to also do that. Go take a toilet break. Go grab yourself a drink. We're going to be back in about a minute's time. Some very special messages from Georgie's on Vista. But when we return, we've got our guest for tonight. So make sure you're back then. Okay? So don't go away. You're tuning in to the Football Out West show. Welcome back to the Football Out West Show program, the podcast, the live podcast coming to you every Thursday night here on our Football Out West News Facebook page from 7 p.m. And later tonight, we will also be uploading this episode onto YouTube. And if you do prefer to watch it on YouTube or unable to watch it live, definitely go to our YouTube channel. Now, Craig, I'll allow you to introduce our next guest.
Yes, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to really announce tonight that we have a special guest. We're really looking forward to what he has to say about football in Victoria. So, welcome to the show, Peter Filopoulos.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on, Craig and Tonci.
Good evening, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a fantastic privilege having you here on the show tonight, and it's also a great opportunity for our fans, our viewers, our listeners, even to get a good insight into what is happening in the world of football. Because a lot of the time, when people don't know what is going on, they start assuming and making wrong assumptions, I guess. So this is an opportunity to really inform the football-loving public out there of what's going on. So let's start, Peter, because we've got so many questions to get through. And we know the COVID-19 situation has affected everyone, and it's something that nobody could have foreseen, that's for sure. We obviously are aware that it has had an effect on football, and but exactly in what way has it had that? Has football in Victoria been affected?
Oh, it's been devastating, very devastating, Tonci. And obviously, we were 2 weeks away from starting our community leagues, and we were well into our NPL seasons for juniors as well. And this came at the worst possible time. We were on track for record registrations, again, very strong growth across the board, and COVID-19, was devastating for the entire football community, as it was for the clubs and our participants. And we were pretty much into, got into crisis management, and we're still in that. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're not out of the woods yet, but we just got to do it as well as we can and keep pushing as hard as we can.
Yeah, great. Just one from me, and I'm sort of preempting a little bit, Peter, and I suppose you have to be a little bit careful with what you say. But, if the government tomorrow or tonight, whenever it is that they're holding the meeting, were to relax the guidelines over the next couple of days, and I believe the 11th is when they were looking at original, will the FFA, or the FFV, will they then review the original date of football, which was the 31st of May?
Yeah, I don't think we'll be playing football before 31st of May. I think there's a possibility we'll be training before the 31st of May. However, we've been working closely with the FFA and the federal government, Minister of Sport and the Chief Medical Officer. And, separately, we've been interacting very closely with the Victorian government here. We are expecting restrictions to be lifted to some degree on Monday, although I think the last week with the breakouts in those abattoirs was unfortunate. And I think the government's relying on a number of tests. I think they need to get to 200,000 tests by the end of the week to give them further data to inform their decisions. So in the background, we've been scenario planning, and we've got a number of scenarios that are ready to go. But in the first thing, I think there's going to be a phased approach to the restrictions being lifted. And hopefully next week means we can start training. And I think even if it's in groups of 10, that'll be a good outcome. Even if it means that, kids and players need to come to training ready to train, no dressing room access, mum and dad have to drop off kids and stay in the car. There'll be a lot of protocols and guidelines that we've been working with government on. We'll have to start on that basis and hope in the weeks following that there will be further restrictions being lifted. We're ultimately getting to commencing, competitive football sometime in June, maybe early July.
Fantastic. And I think before Tonci asks his question, I think there's going to be that trial period or that period of bringing people in steadily. I think that's a pretty straightforward situation. I don't think throwing everybody back on the football field is correct right away. So, I think, training in groups of 10, look, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be difficult for coaches, and it's going to be difficult for, for the teams and generally to try and train together. But look, it's a start. And I think, we're out on the field. If we can get on the field next week, it's a start, and everybody's going to be in a whole better place than they are this week or last week. So.
Yes, I agree.
June, July, middle of winter, I can tell you, I think there's a lot of people who never have been so excited about the prospect of playing football in winter. Anyway, Peter, often the administrators do come in for a lot of criticism from various quarters of the game. We know that. That's just a given. And usually from people unaware of what is happening behind the scenes. Bearing that in mind, what has the Football Victoria been doing behind the scenes during this period to improve football in the state?
Well, obviously, we had to hit crisis management as well as an organisation, and we had to adjust to a dramatic and devastating blow to our revenue streams. So, unfortunately, most of our staff has been stood down. I think we were down to 10% of our payroll for this period, and we're just starting to get them back with JobKeeper. And some of the skeleton staff that we did retain, the focus was one, supporting our clubs during this time. Two is keeping skeleton competition staff to do the scenario planning, and three, some essential business services in the background. So we've been working actively trying to provide as much support through the club ambassadors to our clubs during this tough time. We've also been working hard with councils to provide rent relief on facilities, trying to fast track some facilities planning during this downtime, because there's every reason to believe that at the end of this COVID-19 crisis, that the government's going to be looking towards sport to play a key role in social and economic recovery. So they'll be looking at reigniting participation strategies, and also perhaps fast track some infrastructure projects that are shovel ready to stimulate the economy. So, in part, it was helping the clubs through this tough time and try and cut costs out of there. I think we've got about up to 30 councils that have provided rent relief to our clubs, and we've worked hard on that. We've been working hard with Sports and Rec Victoria to help us with that narrative with councils. We're working in the background with SRV, Sports and Rec Victoria, and the councils to gain access to grounds right through to October, and delay the cricket season, just in case we need to access the spring. Even providing as many resources as possible to clubs about the various stimulus packages that they can take advantage of, and financial relief packages from government, and trying to help them and guide them in that direction.
Perfect. So you mentioned there that some of your staff now is starting to come back, within the last couple of days. And one of the first departments to be stood down across the board, FFA and yourselves, Peter, was the technical department. As a coach myself, I'm sure there's lots of other coaches out there thinking the same. What was the reason, apart from obviously cost, but what was the other reason for standing them down at a time when, from myself, who's currently going through the licenses, could have been a good opportunity for them to maybe get together as a group and start planning for what does football look like from a coach education perspective once COVID-19 is finished? Is there a reason for that? Could they have done that, or have they been doing it, but just not in a format that we know?
Craig, I'm not too sure where you're getting your information from, but technical wasn't singled out more than any other department. We had to, as I said to you early on, we had to adjust our payroll down to 10% of what it was, to be able to get through this situation, and as we call it, the survival phase, the defensive phase rather. And there was no conscious decision to get rid of any department more than any other. It was right across the board. Quite frankly, there was no football activities, and we had to adjust our profit and loss accordingly to get through this situation. I mean, this is about financial sustainability ongoing. So when we resume, we're in a position to resume in a very proactive way.
Okay, but go on, Tonci.
Sorry, I was going to say this is a long question, so bear with us. We understand that coach education is mandated by Football Australia. However, the delivery, content and support systems for personal development by FV in regards to advanced coaching pathways in recent years have come under criticism. So this is a coach asking this question, not myself or Craig. Many coaches in the state feel they have been left on their own to seek and access alternative avenues to obtain quality coaching content for their own ongoing coaching development. Platforms such as Hoodle, Player Development Project, etc. So obviously, this particular coach is talking post-course. So what type of examples, plans, strategies, and support systems are in place by Football Victoria's technical department to ensure that the quality of content being delivered to the stakeholders of coach education is relative and ongoing to Victorian coaches? Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of answers to that. Is that one is we've been working, ever since I've arrived, we've been working really hard to making sure coaches register first on the Play Football system so we know who they are. So that's one. If we don't know who they are, we can't track what accreditations they have. Two, we've been working closely with clubs, and particularly in the NPL space, to ensure that all their coaches are accredited. So we've been doing a lot of that in the background. And in terms of coach education, we've got together with the Football Coaches Association, FFA, and the member federations, and we've created Coach Education Working Group to address some of the shortfalls in coach education, which we've seen webinars now twice a week, mentoring programs, all the right support that we need to provide the coaches, ensuring that coaches who are especially in the development pathways are accredited. I was astonished last year how many coaches who are coaching in the NPL, even though it's a key criteria for them to have the right accreditation, didn't. And that was a bit of an audit that we went proactively to enforce criteria. So there are things happening in that space, and that collaboration piece between the member federations, FFA, and Football Coaches Australia is a vital piece. And I'm pleased to see some of these things develop even further. We need more coaches. With the growth that we're experiencing and the growth we're going to continue to experience, we need more coaches to be registered. We need more coaches accredited. We need more coaches developing. That's the only way we're going to do it.
Craig, have you muted yourself? Craig, have you muted yourself?
No, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. I think that's a really good point you made there about the coaches, Peter, because, if you're expecting our players to pay some high fees, and we'll touch on that later on or in certain areas, you need experienced coaches, you need qualified coaches. A mum or dad in an NPL is not sufficient. So, you have to go through the accreditation. I absolutely, totally agree with you on that one. You touched on then that there's a working group within the coaching department. What are they looking to actually deliver that's going to give better content and engagement and affordability, Peter? Because for some courses it's in excess of 2,500. Yes, there's a cost involved in everything with that, but what are the coaches doing to help with that?
Yeah. Well, that cost is mandated by FFA, and that's something we want to address with FFA in terms of the coaching courses. And we've got some ideas that we're putting forward for them to consider. Well, obviously premature to share now on this interview, but there's definitely things we can do to improve that. And yeah, you're right. The affordability is one of those. And we need to start looking at ways to get more coaches to be accredited. And if cost is one of those barriers of entry, well, we'll need to look at it.
Well, definitely, we're saying we've got a lot of comments coming through, and keep those comments coming. Pose your questions. Unfortunately, we've got that many questions to get through, and we did ask people to send us your questions through email. but we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. But yeah, there's a lot of people saying that cost is an issue, and certainly we know that from Clubland. Speaking of Clubland, here are a few more questions from the football public, and some of these we may have already answered, but nonetheless, we'll go through them. I guess sequentially. Peter, when can senior teams start training together as a team group in prep for restart of the 2020 season? I guess we've kind of answered that, though.
Yeah, we have. I mean, until we know what May 11 looks like next Monday and what those protocols and guidelines, the government, and it does appear the Victorian government, the Dan Andrews government, is going to take a more conservative approach in other states. So I think we're going to have to wait and see. And we've got scenarios that we're working through, but until we see what that looks like on Monday, it's very hard to answer that question.
Yeah, and you mentioned, just touching it briefly just now, do you think the situation with the abattoir, the meat factory, is going to have an influence on the decision they make on Monday?
Yeah, I think potentially, and also the number, depending what they find out of the data they're trying to drive out of those tests, those proactive tests. So, and look, we're not out of the woods yet. And, we've got to be, realistic that we may be able to get football up and running at some point, but we're also approaching winter. And I think, the government's taking a, apprehensive, maybe conservative approach around what we're going to find in winter. So
yeah.
I've spent a lot of time with government. They've been enormously helpful. I'm very impressed with the way they're going through this, especially the way they're engaged with all the sporting associations. And look, our challenges aren't any different to the other winter sports. And I'm on a call with all the winter sports every 2 days, and it's refreshing to see we're not alone with a lot of these issues, right? We're all facing the same issues.
Tonci?
Correct. Or were you going to ask the next one?
No, we'll leave that because I think we've already touched on that earlier on in the piece.
All right. Well, as far as once again, these are questions being posed by the football public, and an interesting topic here. Don't you think if there are far too many restrictions with training, and in particular only groups of 10 allowed, that makes it difficult for volunteers and coaches to devote their times during the week organising training, when some clubs like ourselves have 5 senior men's teams? We won't mention the club in question, but they're saying, from a personal point of view, a large number of volunteers within our club are themselves trying to commit to getting their own businesses up and running during this lockdown period. Thoughts, Peter?
Oh, look, I mean, we need to be realistic that, the next Monday is May 11, and whatever the restrictions that they look like, there's going to be some serious compromises made in terms of the way, we do business. And that's not much we can do about that. And we're going to have to make those concessions. But, our scenario planning has football starting either June or July or even August, right? If numbers continue to improve, I expect those restrictions to be further lifted, and hopefully in a phased approach, we get to the outcome we want. But in the first instance, I think as a community, we owe it to ourselves and to each other to cooperate and find ways around how we're going to do it. And of course, we're going to play our role in supporting the clubs to ensure that, we're able to conduct training in the appropriate ways. And we need to cooperate, and I'll mention some of the things that I think I know about it. The hygiene practices have to be pretty strong. No dressing room access. You have to come ready to play. Mum and dad have to drop you off at the training, not come out of the car, straight onto the training track, 45-minute training session, off the track, in the car, off. So we need to, and hopefully that's 3 or 4 weeks, and then, we have another level of restrictions. Yeah. No one knows what's coming and what's ahead.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a trial and error for the government. They're going to lift the restrictions to some degree. And I think how this virus, how this pandemic, what course it takes after that, whether it's for the better or for the worse, will determine what the next level of restrictions look like. Do we go back to where we are now, or do we, lift the restrictions even further? So we need to be patient, and we need to cooperate, and we need to find a can-do approach.
Now, Craig, I want to ask you this question, because a lot of people on the comments feed, and thank you for that. Do bring your comments. Are saying, oh, it's too restrictive. You can only have 10 and this and that. But you're a coach. You're a coach at NPL junior level. I'm a coach at Miniroos grassroots level. How often do you, apart from when you have games, do you actually have 10 players there in the one? You normally take your assistant coach to train one squad or one part of the team. You'll train another part of the team. It may involve splitting the groups into small groups of 5 or 6. Isn't that the logical thing to do, Craig?
Look, it's not an ideal situation if you're trying to plan for getting games back. But the reality is, as I said earlier on, everybody's back on the training field. If you've got a squad of 18, you can split that up into 2 groups of 9. If you need to swap over coaches halfway through your session, you can swap them over. Players don't need to be together in that environment. You can do lots of coaching. I'm still doing one-on-one and have been doing one-on-one coaching for the last month. It hasn't caused me a problem. It hasn't caused the parents any problems. It hasn't caused the players any problems. So I think people need to have a bit of a sit down and look at what's happened in the last 3 months. If you'd said 2 months ago, in fact, if we'd said 2 months ago, look, there's a chance that we're going to be on the playing field in May, you'd said not a chance. We're not going to be playing football again this season. And I think that was the majority of people. The fact that there's a possibility of us getting on the field next week, the fact that there's a possibility of getting us games going again in June is a huge bonus for everybody. Let's take a little bit of stock here and understand, what's happened. If we can get on the field and we get training and people are getting some exercise and we can start to plan, that's fantastic. For me, getting people on the playing field and back to some kind of normality is important. Sorry, Peter.
And everything I'm telling you at the moment, Craig, is hypotheticals. We're waiting to find out on Monday. To be honest, everything I've said to you today is hypothetical. And we're hoping that we get some favourable outcomes on Monday. But I think health and safety and well-being has to come first.
Absolutely, and I think we all agree with that. Okay, moving along to some more of these questions, and this conjures up an interesting discussion. Will there be any changes to the season format, i.e. games in total, and promotion and relegation of the various divisions?
Oh, look, there's a number of scenarios that have been sort of contemplated, so it's a very difficult question to ask. And it all depends on how soon we can start competition. And there's some competitions like the NPL where we have venues available mostly until December, but in some state league cases, we don't have venues available to us. But like I said before, we've been working with councils to try and get access to grounds we currently share with cricket, for instance, to mid-October. We haven't landed on that yet. But that's a good outcome if we can get 2 or 3 weeks, extra use of these facilities. So it all boils down to when we can start and which scenario we have to enact.
Could there be a possibility within that teams or clubs that have 2, 3, 4 pitches might have to share their venue for a period of time? To enable us to be able to get these games through, because you have to remember we haven't played any football on any of the pitches at the moment, so the pitches should be in relatively good condition. Okay, we're going to finish sometime in October, November, which then gives the council time to prepare the pitches in readiness for the 21 season.
That's right, and we've done the research. So we surveyed all the clubs, so we know which clubs have got facilities available to share and which clubs may have problems and they'll need other facilities. So we've got that data already, in and amongst all our scenarios.
Perfect.
The next question. Sorry, Craig, it's your turn.
Where are we? So a club's going to have any say in how the new format is done, and if they prepare to push forward with a season that's outside of normal parameters. So I think you've touched on that a little bit, but have we had any sort of feedback from clubs saying that they don't want to continue through the season? More so I'm thinking of the community clubs that have players who may play AFL after the season starts or may play cricket. How's that affected the decisions?
the vast majority want to play, and we've got overwhelming feedback in that. So the clear message we're getting from the community is, when can we play? We want to play. In clubs as well. So and I've been humbled with a cooperative and collegial way that we've interacted with our clubs. We've poured ourselves into clubland as well, and they've been terrific. They've responded well. And in some cases they're experiencing their own personal challenges as well, but they're also doing their best to monitor the club progress and interested in what goes on. A lot of people see football as their social outlet, right?
Yeah.
And people are keen to get it going.
Okay, well, if you've just tuned into the Football Out West show here on our Facebook page live, you're listening to Tonci and Craig, and our special guest tonight is Peter Filopoulos, the Football Victoria CEO. We're going to take a little bit of a break. Don't go too far away. Go grab yourself a drink, make yourself a coffee, go do what you need to do. We'll be back in about 60 seconds, not even longer than that. And when we return, Peter will be with us, and we will go on about facilities, strategic planning, and what we as a football community together can do to really take this sport to the next level.
CMF Soccer Coaching offers tailor-made personal and small group development coaching throughout the western suburbs of Melbourne and Greater Geelong. With over 20 years of experience working and playing within the academy systems of several professional clubs in both the UK and Australia, CMF Soccer Coaching has a player-first philosophy to ensure that all sessions are tailored around the individual's needs at all times. Under the guidance of UEFA and AFC qualified coaches, we specialise in one-on-one and small group coaching sessions, offering European-style academy-level training with the sole aim of improving players' technical and game understanding in a safe, friendly environment. If you are new to the game or a seasoned campaigner looking for some additional coaching, then we can help. To find out more about what we can offer and how we can help you improve your game, visit our Facebook or Instagram pages for more information, or simply email us at cmfsoccercoaching@gmail.com.
Welcome back to the Football Out West show here on our Facebook Live page. We've got myself, Tonci Prusac, and Craig Filer here, and we're joined in this studio, or in our virtual studio, if you like, by the CEO of Football Victoria, Peter Filopoulos. Gents, it's been a fantastic insight so far in the first, 30-odd minutes of this interview, and we've still got a heap of questions to get through. Craig, I'll let you start the round with the next one.
Yeah, and please keep your questions coming in the comments, and if there's something there that we feel we can ask and we get some time, we'll certainly get through those questions. So, Peter, another question from one of our listeners that's come in is, and then we turn our attention, I suppose, to facilities, or should we say the lack of facilities that we have. Has Football Federation approached the state government to push for more soccer pitches in both primary and secondary schools, because that's obviously an important area for development as well?
Yeah. Well, that's one of my favourite topics. Ever since I started 2 years ago, it's been a key focus of mine is the facilities strategy and government advocacy. And the first thing we did a facility strategy which clearly showed that we're going to fall short in the next 8 years by 420 full-size equivalent pitches across Victoria. And
sorry, how many, Peter? 420.
420, and over the next by 2026. And we built a policy platform around that, including some data which suggested in 1 year alone in 2018, we had 12,500 boys and girls who missed out on playing the game they want at clubland because clubs just purely couldn't take any more. And since that time, we've unlocked about $227 million of local, state and federal government funding, which to date translates to 50 completed projects, full-size equivalent pitches, 50. And there's 30 more currently in progress. So that's 80. And then since the $20 million World Game Facilities Fund that was released in December, we've identified another 70 projects which will potentially benefit from that. So we've done an enormous amount of work there. And we've got some great engagement with government. And it started off with John Aaron, a good person at the West in Geelong, and Minister Aaron, and we've continued that exercise with Martin Pakula and of course Ross Spence, the new Minister for Community Sport. So we still haven't even scratched the surface though. So we keep pushing that data-driven narrative, I call it. And in the past, we've had a chronic underinvestment in government funding in our sport. That's not entirely government's fault. That's football's fault. We haven't built a data-driven narrative like we have over the last couple of years in Victoria. Ours has been that successful that Football Victoria has been asked to assist the other member federations in putting a similar strategy together in their states. And not to mention, we're trying to bring the home of the Matildas here as well. We've got a $15 million federal government commitment to bring the home of the Matildas here. And we've got a business case in with state government for the October budget to release an adequate funding to get the project started. It's a two-phased approach. By the end, we'll have a $90 million state-of-the-art, world-class, high-performance training and elite training centre, including the admin offices for Football Victoria and FFA's high-performance staff. So there's been a lot of work done with government, but the key learning for me, and one I do share nationally with the other federations, is the way to approach it is by strategy, not by banging fists on tables. And I obviously learned that by being involved with other sports. Football hasn't been great at that. And, over the last 2 years, we've built that data-driven narrative and strategy, and government all of a sudden could understand it and could understand the need. It was their decisions could be made on data. And, I take pride in seeing facilities every week emerge. Every week we've got a new facility being announced somewhere. And if we continue on this trajectory, we'll get close to meeting that 420 pitch gap by 2026.
Okay, we've talked on we've harped on a lot of the strategic plans that are happening at the moment with football, both short-term and long-term. But let's be frank, Peter, are the clubs themselves, are they being strategic enough? Like, in your opinion, are the clubs themselves doing enough to develop their own strategic plan, their own local government policies? Or are clubs in clubland just bogged down by the day-to-day running of the clubs and keeping their head above water? And that's a problem as far as their lack of resources.
It's a good question, Tonci. And obviously we've been doing the top-down, unlocking funding top-down. And the other part now, that we've done a lot of work with is the bottom-up funding, is helping clubs develop their own strategies and facility strategies, engaging councils to get master plans done and council commitments, and to be able to get to shovel-ready type projects that could take advantage of some of this funding that's coming from federal and state. And look, that's the way we've got to do it. And we've got to play our role, and we do play our role with clubs in helping them develop those strategies and facilities plans. And helping engage with the councils and the local MPs to get the shovel ready. We've got the funds top down that can be capitalised, and the work's not finished there. We've got to work with clubs and continue to work with clubs to get in a position to be able to capitalise on that funding, which is it's going to become more and more prevalent in football. our numbers are growing at such a rate that it's now becoming hard to ignore the government. And if we continue to provide the data-driven strategy and policy platforms, and we're having the right conversations at the right levels, we're going to get more and more facilities out there.
Yeah, and I suppose we have to we only have to look if we're looking at facilities of our sponsor in the George Cross facility up at Fraser's Rise there, and the amount of work that's gone in there with Melton City Council, obviously, and the club, who have been strategic over the last couple of years to get that facility. And for me, that's the benchmark now for facilities within Victoria.
And look, and Ed Gouch is a great example, and I often ask clubs who have similar aspirations to talk to Eddie around the strategy that he put in place several years ago. This doesn't happen overnight, and you don't get a $17 million facility like Sunshine George Cross did, but overnight or a stroke of luck. You've got to put your best foot forward and develop the process and the strategy to do that. And I think Eddie is a good template of how he does that. There's a lot of clubs out there that are doing that now, and it's really pleasing to see. We are progressive. We are progressive in Victoria with this strategy, and it's working.
Now, I want to just mention that there are prospective coaches on the comments that are actually offering collaboration. So they're actually saying, afterwards, I'm happy to share my resources. I'm happy to pass on some bits of knowledge. And look, Mark Sultana, the president of Caroline Springs George Cross, he's come on our show. He's mentioned in the past, but he's also mentioned off air. He's more than happy to help clubs in that locality, almost to educate them how to deal with government, but also if there's things that they need help with, whether it's ground rationalisation or whatever the case may be. And maybe that's another thing, Peter, that the clubs themselves probably need to start having less of this us against them mentality and more of a collaborative approach, at least off the field. Yes, rivalries are always going to exist on the park, but off the field, we probably need to work a lot closer.
Oh, absolutely. You can always learn from each other. And, I've been at Clubland, and, I started my career in sports at Clubland, and the only way I learned was by sharing experiences and seeking guidance from other sports, other clubs, and always investing in trying to learn something new. And that's the only way we can do it and get better. I was pleased when I was CEO of Perth Glory that the A-League clubs had the similar approach, and we often helped each other and got on the phone, and we were foes on the field, but off the field we worked collaboratively together.
Yeah, and on the coaches' side, there's lots of good content now on the internet. Whether it's Huddle, whether it's Players Development Project, where the Football Federation are putting their own. You've got your Coaches Coaches Australia, who are putting seminars and webinars on a weekly basis. I've been on a number of them, so there's lots of way now for coaches to get their knowledge. Knowledge is key. We think we know it all, but the reality is we don't. So more that we can do around education personally for yourselves is better. So,
actually, Craig, sorry to interrupt you. Just about half an hour before we went on air, I actually reposted on our Facebook page a good webinar from Football Federation Australia with Sean Douglas going on about grassroots football. So look, it's a lengthy one, but goes for about an hour or so. But certainly worth watching in your spare time. But as you said, there's lots of opportunity, and it's great to see more and more of this happening via social media and or webinars, etc.
Yeah, there was another one last night with the Coaches Australia, who had Ernie Merrick on, and Ernie Merrick was on for 45 minutes talking about his time in football, and that was a really good listen to. So there is plenty, as you say. Peter, an area for me. I've been in Australia now for coming up 7 years. And
you still haven't lost that accent.
No, and I'm football mad. Nothing's ever going to change. But in Australia, are we? I'm probably going to upset a lot of people when I say this. So, are we trying to be something we're not? Are we trying to copy what Europe are doing? And the reality is, we're 25 million, 27 million, which is the number of people London have. So, do we need to be a little bit more respectful of what we've got here, respectful of the culture, respectful and plan accordingly based on what we have?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we're our football community. We're very hard on ourselves. I remember going to the state leagues as a young kid in 1975, 1974. I went to my first National League game in the Phillips Soccer League in 1977. We were the first professional sport in Australia to have a national competition. We were the first professional sport to have a collective bargaining agreement with players, and we have been progressive in the past. We've been bold, we've been visionary, and where I think we let ourselves down is that we sometimes make the wrong decisions, and I think we need to back ourselves in, and the way we're going to back ourselves in is stop trying to be like other sports in Australia. We're not like the other sports in Australia. We're not like the AFL. We're not the NRL. We've got global elements of our game, and we've got so much to learn from overseas. I've been to the UK, and you're right. I don't think we can replicate UK just yet. Although I must say, I felt the closest I have felt to UK has been probably when I was at Perth Glory, because they've got such a strong contingent of English following expats, and just the culture they create on match day and the expectations. But we need to back ourselves in, and I think we're still an emerging league. I think where we can improve is being bold. I don't think 10, 11 A-League clubs in Australia is adequate enough to be able to capture the interest and the eyeballs. And I think we need to be bold with that. I think we need to look at incentivising teams for investing in the A-League, and looking at maybe at some point punishing the teams that aren't. So I think promotion and relegation, and with a national second tier, has to come in at some point. I think that can only be good for the sport, because you're not going to settle for being at the bottom of the ladder. In the A-League right now, if you're having a bad year, so what? We'll bottom out. Let's start planning for next year. We're not going to get relegated, and there's no punishment. I think the interest in the game, I'll constantly imagine the interest in the game if there was punishment by relegation, what that means. And I've been watching Sunderland to my die. I've been watching Class of '92, and how exciting is it? And that's the way we're going to build that's how we're going to get closer to what England is. Unfortunately, I think the problem is we're trying to replicate a competition in Australia which is consistent with the way the other codes are running their competitions. And I think we're going to run it the way we need to run it as football, by the global standards, and build those tiers. And I was on the phone with Graham Arnold this week, and he said to me quite clearly, he said the member federations are doing their job, for the ages between 0 to 16. He says, how I know that is when our under-17s go to the World Cup, we end up in the last 16 in the world, because that's phenomenal. Where we have our problem is the kids aren't getting an opportunity in senior football. So that to me means if they're not getting the opportunities in senior football, we don't have enough teams in Australia. And that's where, expansion of the A-League and a national second tier, if we are truly bold, aspirational and visionary, we just have to find a way to make it happen.
Just going to interrupt you there. Is it now the right time to be bold and make decisions, Peter?
Absolutely.
Because in 2 years' time, we're going to forget the COVID would have gone, and we'll all be looking back and we'll be having the same conversation. Why didn't we change things? This is a perfect time to say it needs to change. Now, it might not happen this year, it might not happen next year, but let's put things in place to say 2022, this is going to happen, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's interest. With the broadcaster challenges at the moment, we're going to force it. In some ways, that lucrative broadcast deal made us a lazy sport, if you don't mind me saying, and we didn't continue to evolve the leagues. And one of the things I did agree with Rob Sherman was we need to look at an entire competition structure review, not look at the competition structures in silos. This is the time to do it, because I don't think it's there. I hope that we can retain Fox Sports, or we can find another suitable broadcast partner if anything happens there. I'm not too close to it, but it is now that we have to make those decisions, and we have to put a time frame on it, and give the 1.96 million participants what they want for. We've got 1.96 million participants, but we've only got 10 A-League professional clubs in Australia. It's just not simply enough. Where do those kids, just looking at what Graham Arnold's points were, where are those kids going to get their opportunities if they want to play first team football? And we've got an A-League where there's players that are aging still playing. The similar can be said about our NPL competitions. Wouldn't it be great to open up those opportunities, remove the bottleneck, and I think you'll see kids are playing. I said the other day that the AIS of the old days, those graduates would come out of AIS and go straight into National Soccer League first team football. And that's what we've got to get back to. The reason why that's not happening now is because, unfortunately, when we transitioned from the NSL to the A-League, we forgot to take some of those structures that those clubs built over 50, 60 years, 70 years, and we just eradicated them, moved them aside, shunned them, and we created an A-League with no youth development structure, and we started to divest away from the AIS program. And there's no surprise why we've got that bottleneck now, and we've got to look at those mistakes and trying to rectify them immediately.
So just into Victoria, then let's get back to Victorian and Victorian football. How can we get these young players playing at the highest level possible? Yes, we have the NPL, and a lot of clubs do some great things with their youth development. How do we get more players in? And if we were to change the structures of leagues within Victoria, what would it look like in your eyes? Is it we've done a great.
I think that I was in talking to Ron Smith. He believes that we're the progressive state. The way we conducted our competition reviews for both men and boys and women and girls, and I think they're and I agree. I think they're progressive restructures. And one of the things we achieved was, the youngsters are getting more games out of this new junior boys and NPL and the girls NPL, which we're implementing for next year. We've eliminated, we've added the age groups. Kids need more games compared to what the kids are getting in Europe. And I've been to Europe with my boy. And I think at 11 and 12 and 13, our kids aren't right out of the park. It's in the older years when the 16, 17, 18s, they're getting a lot more games than what our kids are getting. And I think this competition restructure for the junior boys NPL and the girls NPL has been a good one because they're getting more games. 40-week programs, 40, 45-week programs can only be good for the kids' development, and 33 games a year can only be good for their development. The gap is, where do they play with the opportunities at senior level? That's why we spoke about that national, competition restructure, which will cascade into Victoria.
And in terms of that, sorry, Tonci, because it's on my, and we talked about the 32 games or 33 games that the NPL juniors will play. You toss the coin the other side, and the seniors are only playing 22. So if you look at the 3 NPL leagues, and then you look at all the state leagues, they're only going to play 22 games a season, from NPL to State League 5 and beyond.
Yeah, so to answer that question, I think there's really only one NPL, and that's the top tier, and the other two are essentially NPL 2 and NPL 3. It's when the State League divisions start. And that was part of the review. Part of the review was that we evolve it every year. But the initial clubs were the ones below the NPL, were the ones that actually, the clear feedback was that they wanted 22 games in that review. And we're happy to review that again if they want more games. But that was the feedback that came back from the clubs in the lower leagues.
So
Okay.
that's the clubs themselves talking, which is good to hear, good to see that the federation is actually listening to the clubs. All right, let's talk hypotheticals, because a lot of this, as you said earlier in the piece, is very much hypothetical, because we don't know what's going to happen next week, let alone next month, and obviously there's so many contingencies in place. But I guess from a hypothetical point of view, what can we as a football community, so clubs, federation, players, coaches, the private sector, etc., how can we be more innovative, at least here in Victoria? What do we need to do? What do we need to achieve to make football a lot more significant in the lives of more Victorians than it already is, Peter?
Well, a good start is that we support each other and, and support the game in every possible way we can, I think that by supporting our Socceroos and Matildas, supporting our A-League clubs and supporting our NPL and community clubs as best we can is a good start, and that's where it all happens. I think we've got to support each other and support the game in whole, I would say.
Craig?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go back to the seasons, back to where we started. I'm just going to there's a couple more questions, but I just want to look. I'm reading some of the comments that are coming out on the screen here, Peter. So I'm going to sort of delve into some of those if we can. Is there a cutoff point for when this league can't start? So we get into July and the season's still late. Is the FE's idea that we do get football up and running this year, or is there a point where we say, right, guys, it's not going to happen and we're going to start planning for 2021?
No, it's absolutely that we believe we're going to get football resumed, and we're quite confident about that.
And the other ones have gone. So if you want to crack on a minute, Tonci, and I shall find the other question.
All right. Well, we've with the recent comments around the governance model and overhead costs of having several state federations as well as the national body, and that's become quite prominent with a lot of ex-footballers, ex-Socceroos posing the question: are there any plans, Peter, to consider the governance model in place now? And if not, when will that review take place, as it is of prominent interest to the stakeholders of the game?
Yeah, well, look, it's an interesting debate, and it's one that is going to be had above my pay grade, and one with Congress. But look, I think it's also a very simplistic argument. It's a lot more sophisticated than saying, we need to get rid of the member federations. I think the member federations are playing a key role, and we can't expect the FFA from 1 Oxford Street, Paddington, to run every aspect of our game. I mean, Victoria, every year we initiate 40,000 fixtures. The other thing you've got to consider at the moment, if you look at the balance sheets of the member federations, that's where a lot of the liquidity is. And if you look at the balance sheet of the FFA, there's no liquidity there. So my question would be, how do we work better as a group? How do we make our collective capital, IP, and resources work more efficiently and more effective as a group? And how do we develop a better culture, a more progressive strategic culture, and align our strategies for better effect? And at the moment we don't have a national strategy from FFA that we can localise. So that's a good start. Is developing a national strategy which we can localise in all the member federations, and there's alignment, and we can share our resources, our capacity, our capability, our IP to be able to deliver on that strategy.
Craig?
So I've got some more questions around. I'm coming off tangent a little bit. Community football's massive for me, Peter. I think that's an area that I think sometimes is overlooked. We talk about the A-League, which we have to have a professional league. We have to have the NPL underneath that. Community football is massive. How can we stop clubs that develop a young kid from the age of 6 to the age of 16 being picked off by the professional clubs without any sort of compensation or help or guidance the other way? Because you see a lot of players now that and there's three, we got three, so two in particular will go off and pick the 2 best players of each team to get a super team at a pro club. But that leaves the community clubs short. And, so I suppose the question I'm going to ask is a transfer system where teams that pull off those young kids away from the clubs that have helped develop them over a period of time, is the plan, or can there be a plan in place to be able to offer a transfer system?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the competition structure review. And one of the elements, there's many elements there, but one of them is the review, the overhaul of the domestic transfer and compensation fee system. And I know FIFA is looking at reviewing that at the moment, or are reviewing that at the moment, along with agents and the compensation fee system. But I think there's things we can do in Australia to improve that system and incentivise clubs for, and that could help us greatly if clubs feel like they're rewarded and incentivised for developing talent. And that's part of what we need to do. That's a football ecosystem by global standards. So that's something as part of the competition structure. It has to happen.
And is that something that we can do in Victoria, or does it have to come from above?
As a national scheme. Look, there's things that clubs can do. So we talk about a transfer and compensation fee system. The clubs that have good talent, having their players on amateur forms doesn't protect them, because they're free to go at any time. So my advice to clubs is, if you've got good talent, you protect yourself by putting them on pro contracts. And amateurs are free to go anytime they want. But even then, there's protections through a compensation fee system. There's the transfer fee and a compensation fee system. Both need overhaul. One's more lucrative than the other. A transfer fee only arises from a player that you've got on a long-term contract that entices you to release them.
So what happens in a situation where you've got a club that has 8s through to 16s, and then you have 18s, 20s, seniors, MPL? What happens to those clubs that have 16-year-olds that, when they get to 16, because the club is not in an MPL structure, they just go and they go off and play? So they've had those kids for 4, 5, 6 years and then lose them. We need to do something to protect those clubs.
They still get compensated through that training and compensation fee system. So, for instance, let's pick a European club. If one of those kids goes to a European club, a tier 1 European club, there's 90,000 euros, their incentive for the club that he played from anywhere between 12 and 23. So there are mechanisms in place for those clubs to be incentivised from an international perspective. But I think for the domestic perspective, we need to get better at that. At the moment, there's a cap, and I think that needs to be overhauled completely.
And Simon Camilleri here has just asked a question. So what would happen when a community team moves to another community club in terms of transfer fees?
Well, that needs to be looked at as well. When I say an overhaul, I think we need to look at an overhaul of the domestic transfer system and compensation fee system. But there's also the part about restriction of trade. I remember when we had an open transfer system back in the NSL days. The PFA had a view that it was also a restriction of trade, because you can imagine, the big price tags sometimes placed on players. I think Gary Cole has spoken about, a 30,000 price tag on him in the 70s or 80s, I think he often talks about. So definitely needs to be reviewed, but also not one that is prohibitive to player movement.
Now, we talked about it has to be a national policy, so it has to stem from FFA and go all the way down. But how much pressure can the member federations exert on FFA? And have you spoken to the other federations, namely like New South Wales Federation and so forth? Are they of the same opinion as Victoria? And can that movement, or can that push come from the states and exert a bit of pressure on FFA? And in a second part of that question, we've got a new CEO, James Johnson, who is a football man, and he has been speaking quite often about reform. What in the next 6 to 12 months can you see in that field as far as transfer fees and the overhaul of transfer fees happening, Peter?
Well, there's no one better placed in our game than James Johnson to overhaul our domestic transfer and compensation fee system, because he knows it intimately. He worked at FIFA and worked on that. So, you know, I think he's best placed to be able to engineer or design a domestic transfer and compensation fee system. You know, more than anyone that has ever been in our game, and you know, and he has a lot of contacts at FIFA, having worked there. So I'm looking forward to what his ideas are on that regard. But from a state point of view, I can't speak on behalf of other states, but here in Victoria, we're big proponents of a broader ecosystem, football ecosystem, and we're considered one of the progressive member federations. We're always pushing the envelope and wanting the game to progress and evolve.
Okay, fantastic. Registration fees. I think it's a topic that most people, if we look at the some of the comments earlier on, it's a big topic for debate. So one of the questions that we had here was, what's being done to sort the ongoing issues with high registrations for players to play the World Game, given players in most countries pay very little to play?
Yeah, I don't know if that's accurate, but that's fine. But look, I find that we need to distinguish between development leagues and community football. And the NPL, for instance, is a development league, which represents only 6% of our overall participation. 6%. And so often I'm asked these questions in a way that it's portrayed like it's at 94% of the problem. It's not. And then when you break down the NPL, you know, there's fees that are charged between, I think, $1,400 to $2,200. They're 40 to 45 week programs, 3 training sessions a week plus a game per week for 40 weeks with highly accredited coaching, technical staff, technical direction, expensive facilities. They've got to, you know, tick off certain criteria. I think that we need to turn that conversation from being the cost of football to the value of football. And then when you look at 94% of our participation in the community leagues, you know, the data I've seen hasn't suggested that we're overpriced in that regard. And there's a lot of apples to oranges comparisons. Some sports are clever in, you know, publishing a fee, but then having a lot of fees outside of that, like uniforms and travel costs and a whole heap of other, you know, I think that it's, you know, I've looked at it, and clubs have genuinely got some serious costs, and we don't have any top-down funding from, you know, the billions and billions of dollars of broadcast rights, you know, poured into the AFL and the NRL. So the money, unfortunately, it's a user-pay system with very little subsidisation because the revenues aren't there to flow down.
Now, Craig, you're involved, like we've said, you're involved in an NPL club, and the director of senior football at your club, Josip Skoko, well-known ex-Socceroo. He actually, on the Optus roundtable discussion that featured Mark Viduka, Craig Moore, John Aloisi, who was on our program last week, he actually broke it down. He actually broke it down, all the costs. And when you do break the costs down, the clubs actually don't make any money on junior NPL players. On the contrary, they actually have to find external sponsors to cover the shortfall. So, I mean, it all comes back down to, I mean, for example, how many training sessions a week would your squad be undertaking per week?
We train 3 nights a week, so we train 3 to 4, dependent on availability of players. And then obviously we have the game on the weekend. So, you know, and a comment here from Mark Sultana: if you break it down, it works out to be $50 per week per child.
Yeah. And if you've got 4 training sessions,
the thing I will say too, right, but what I will say is that if you're an elite hockey player, or if you're an elite swimmer who needs specialised coaching, if you're an elite, you know, there's costs associated with those sports. But too often I'm asked these questions, and NPL fees, which is a development league, is compared to Auskick, which is a 12-week program once a week. And it's like a community, little nippers type program. I think this is also a narrative that's been driven by other sports when they go to government, trying to throw mud at us. And we've got to tell that story better in terms of the value, exactly like Mark Sultana said. The only question I have around that, it is $50 a week. We've got to find ways for talented kids who can't afford to be in those programs, so we can help subsidise them. And that's what I want to turn our attention to. And we've also got to make sure we continually cap those costs. So New South Wales are a lot more expensive than us in NPL. I think they're charging $2,700. We've kept ours capped at 22. And what we've also done is we've expanded the NPL footprint to be able to open up the market forces and to drive costs down further.
Tonci?
Yeah, look, all right. I mean, there's so many questions. We're not going to get through all of them. And like I said, there's been some absolutely fantastic questions brought up in the comments section, and we're not deliberately ignoring them. It's simply we did have a procedure in place. We asked people to email us the questions, and we've got about 35, 40 questions. We're only going to get through about 25 tonight. But one that I guess is still relevant to a lot of clubs is the FFA Cup / Doherty Cup. Is there a plan, Peter, for that to still go ahead? And if so, when will the draw take place? Okay.
Yeah, look, I can't answer. I mean, that's part of the scenarios and, part of the protocols, but that is intended to resume again along with the Nike Cup. So there's nothing really I can reveal to your listeners tonight. But, as of Monday, we'll be in a better position to start seeing which scenarios. And I don't think we're out of the woods on Monday. I think Monday's about what the restrictions look like and can we get training started. Then there's a bit more work to do in terms of where we're heading and turn our attention to when we can resume competitions. And that'll be all based on how this pandemic travels from here on.
So if we were to get back, and I'm going to ask a question that I think a lot of people want to hear now, Peter. So if we get back to playing in, let's just say we start playing in June, and we get a full, are we planning on getting a full season in? What does it look like? More importantly, is there going to be promotion and relegation?
I can't answer either of those questions at the moment. There's a number of scenarios. You're trying to draw me to provide more detail, and I can't share any of those details at the moment. There's many, many scenarios, and it all depends on when we can actually commence competitions.
Craig, any more questions?
No, I think we could be here all night, and we could get into a lot of stuff. There's some fantastic comments on the side. We've tried to get through as many as we can. It is difficult. We knew we were going to have a lot of interest tonight. The numbers have been fantastic, but I know
half of them too. I'm reading the comments. I know half of them already. I've seen them.
A good question there. Look, we'll touch on one question, and I guess it's a hypothetical because it's not probably a Victorian question. It's more a national question. But a couple of people have said, how do we turn it around so that we do get that top-down funding? Good point, good question. But once again, I guess that really depends on what happens at the national level because it's not just Victoria. But any thoughts on that, Peter? How could we, and this is probably getting back to that innovation question we asked earlier, how can we change our sport so that more external funding is coming into the sport?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's one that, we have such big, bold ambitions and, we need to unlock more value in our sport and drive more commercial outcomes. And that's something that, we're going to have to work a lot harder. And James Johnson's only been in the chair for 3 months, but it all comes down to unlocking value in our IP and assets and brands, and driving some commercial outcomes. And the sooner we can do that. It's going to take some time, but we need to unlock more funding into our sport so we can do all the things that we need to do. And including getting some funds trickling down to the grassroots, which we haven't been able to do.
Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show tonight. I know we're not going to answer all the questions, but I guess a lot of those questions will be answered once we have a clearer picture from Dan Andrews, Scott Morrison, and the powers that be further up the tree, up the pyramid. But having said that, we do appreciate you coming on the show. I guess all we can say is that, as you suggested earlier, we need to work together. There is that old saying, we're all in it together, which I don't exactly agree with, but as far as the football is concerned, we do need to be in it together. So we thank you for your honesty, thank you for your forthrightness. Like everyone else here, we just cannot wait to see football back on the park, and I'm sure you're exactly the same.
Absolutely. And the only message I will leave people is when we can start competitions, support your local teams, whether it's a community club or it's an NPL club or it's an A-League club. Support your teams in every way you can. We're a massive community, and that's the way we're going to grow our game, by supporting our teams and supporting our national teams. And that's the other, we need to support each other and support our teams and demonstrate to the world and the rest of Australia why we're a big sport. We've got the participation base, but we need to support each other and support our ecosystem and work together. So I'm excited. After all this inactivity, I'm itching to get out there in the community and watch a game or two. So I can't wait.
Absolutely. Peter, thank you once again. The CEO of Football Victoria, Peter Filopoulos, spending an hour and a half with us tonight. So we really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Peter.
Well done. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
Craig, well, that was a massive interview. I know not everyone is going to be happy. There are a lot of people walking away not very, very happy. But one thing is, you got to respect the man for coming on the show. One, and look, I think a lot of people also have to be realistic. They're asking for exact dates. They're asking for exact scenarios. The reality is, we won't know, people. We won't know until what happens in the next 2-3 days, in the next 2-3 weeks, in the next 2-3 months. Having said that, he did say something very, very, very important that resonated with me towards the end, and that is, when this is all over, folks, get involved with your club. I have heard it that many times from so many people in clubland. The biggest problem with most clubs is lack of volunteers. Parents don't get involved. They drop off their kids. There's not enough club members that come along to games or, spend their money at the bar. They don't get involved. It's usually the 60, 70-year-old pensioner that's been doing it for the last 40 years that has to go around and marking the lines and cleaning the rubbish bins and the dressing rooms. Folks, if an extra person gets involved, if we have 100% more people getting involved in the clubs, every club's going to prosper. And I think that is just the bottom line, that people need to, as they say, pull the finger out and get involved with their respective clubs. Support their clubs in a tangible way. What do you reckon, Craig?
Look, I think it's, you're right. People now need to embrace it. Get out and support your clubs. There's a lot of people that have commented tonight. We've got fantastic numbers coming through. The reality is, guys, that Peter, whether we think he speaks like a politician or as a mate, as one person called, the reality is he's in a role that's trying to appease hundreds of thousands of people, and he's not going to. He has to try and be as open and as honest as he can. There were questions that, yes, I believe that were probably rebounded off, which could have answered in different ways. There was lots of questions. Really, we wanted to talk about promotion, relegation, FFA Cup. Is there an opportunity for us to have a different type of cup in Victoria to get more games in? Is there an opportunity for us to have, an elite IES centre in Victoria? They got the talent TIDT program, but that's really not what it's designed for. So I think, look, there's a lot of questions still to be asked. I think it's great that we had him on. Does it clear up a lot of stuff? Probably not. But, I suppose he's in a position where he can't open up too much because he probably doesn't know himself. So, look, we thank him very much for coming on. We would like to get him on at some point again in the near future to ask a few more questions. But, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We're talking about starting back and everybody's getting giddy about starting back next week because that's what was said in the opening comment. But the reality is, if Daniel Andrews and ScoMo come on tomorrow and say, no, it's not happening, it's not happening, guys.
Well, look, I do want to thank every single person that has been that has contributed to our show, whether it be the ones that have sent questions in, whether it be the ones that have put some comments up today. We really do appreciate you. The numbers have been amazing, and that just tells you, one, the level of interest in our game. Don't worry about our show, our game. Let's talk about our game. And also the fact that a lot of people do want answers. And look, what we are going to pledge to all of our viewers out there is, as we get that information, we will be disseminating it to you. We will be passing it on. We will be doing our darndest to get, I guess, to the bottom of all of this. Next week, we're going to have two incredible guests, fantastic guests, who are really going to give their own insight into some of the problems, some of the issues, and maybe some of the solutions that we need to address. And Craig, did you want to make the announcement of who our big guests are for next week's show?
Yeah, look, it's another good show for us next week. We're trying to get the right type of people that's going to open debate and allow us to open up and get everybody involved. So next week we have a guy who played for the Socceroos. He also played in the Premier League for Middlesbrough and Manchester City. Yeah, quite a good career is the old Danny Tiato. So he's going to come on next week. And Danny has been quite prevalent in his views of football in Australia over the last couple of weeks. So it'll be really interesting to see what Danny has to say. And then on the other side to that, we've got a different type of guest in Simon Hill, the Foxtel commentator, who's going to come on, and he's going to talk about, his career in the commentary and what he sees is wrong within the game of in Australia. Simon's obviously an ex-Pom himself, so has seen sort of both sides of the fence, and it'll be really interesting to see what Simon has to say next week. So look, we're trying as hard as we can to get the right people on. It's not always going to go away, guys. We're not always going to get the answers that we want. As much as, I go back to what Peter was saying, we probably wanted a little bit more. It was never going to happen. So let's be grateful that there's an opportunity for us to start football again next week. And if it doesn't, then we have to stick together and make sure that when it does start, that we're all prepared and ready to go.
Absolutely. Once again, thank you to our major sponsor for tonight's show, Georgie's on Vista. They will be open for takeaway on Mother's Day, also Friday night and Saturday night. So whatever you do, make sure that you can get yourself some delicious Maltese and Australian-inspired tucker from Georgie's on Vista. Big show next week, as we mentioned, but also at the same time, make sure every day you're just touching base and having a look at our Facebook page, Football Out West, and make sure to get a lot of information that way as well. Someone is saying, can we get a female guest on at some stage? Well, if you tune into our show next week, our sister show, the Geelong Region Soccer Show, we're going to have not one but two fantastic female guests in Joe Plummer, the chairperson or outgoing chairperson of the Geelong Region Football Committee, and also we will be having the Galaxy United technical director, Bianco Celano-Witter, who was part of an interesting round table discussion on women's football, an ongoing discussion, by the way. That's on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. So if you can't wait till next Thursday, make sure to tune in on Tuesday on the Geelong Region Soccer News Facebook page.
And we also have in a couple of weeks' time, we've got Ivan Jolic, who's also going to come back on the show, and he's obviously the Matilda's assistant coach. So last week we are working on having a women's show as well. So just keep watching, guys.
Women involved in a big way as well. We need. You look at the comments, you look at the people getting involved, and it's probably 75-80% males. Women, we need to hear from you. There's just not enough at the moment getting involved in the sport and in our show. So a big call out. We need them to be involved as well. on that note, a very, very happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there. There's an old Croatian saying that every household, the woman holds the fourth pillar, and I certainly agree with that. I think a big shout out to all the mums, because it's the mums that get involved in a big, big way behind the scenes, taking the kids to soccer practice, football practice, and it's their day. Ain't no corona going to break our stride. And on Sunday, we'd love to wish all the mums out there, all the soccer mums out there, everyone that's involved with football. And that is a mum. It's your day. Your day's every day, but in particular on Sunday. So a happy Mum's Day to everyone out there in football land.
Just to finish off, Tonci, it was remiss of me right at the start, and I think it's very important that we do acknowledge it. Unfortunately, as a football community, we have to pay our respects to a young lad who I actually coached against a couple of times, a young lad called Simo Mitrovic, who sadly passed away on the weekend for Sebastopol Vikings, also an ex-Ballarat player. Unfortunately, he passed away in the early hours of Sunday morning. So, you know, from the football community, I think it's important that we pay our respects and wish the family and Sebastopol Vikings all the very best in this difficult time for them.
Always a sad time when a 24-year-old leaves this planet prematurely. Sad way to end tonight's show, but we thank you once again for being a part of tonight's show. Thank you very, very much. Do not go away. Make sure that next Thursday you join us again at 7 p.m. Until then, have a great week. Happy Mother's Day.
Good night.